We predicted it. We called it. I told you. Friday news dump. Not quite at the end of the day, but it was indeed a Friday announcement. Ja Morant suspended for 25 games. That covers almost a third of the season. There's rumblings that the Players Association is not happy. Will Ja Morant appeal? Oh, and another major trade occurred in which the Phoenix Suns go all in. How does that impact the Grizzlies? We have a lot to discuss on a loaded Manic Monday. Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It was a busy weekend. Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. I'm a father of 3 myself, so it's always nice when us fathers get our due. So pat myself on the back for being a functioning adult who's able to have children. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Grizzlies, a Juneteenth edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Obviously an important day, not just in Memphis, but across the country. Renewed significance these last few years, and it's really cool to see the growth and development of the now national holiday. Probably should have always been, but we don't need to go too far down that rabbit hole. So happy Juneteenth, happy belated Father's Day, all those wonderful things. It is great to be with you on this Monday, and we have plenty to discuss here on Locked On Grizzlies. But of course, first, we have to shout out our wonderful title sponsor for this episode. It is Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Check us out on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things. I'm joined by the wonderful Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Damichael, it was a busy end to your work week last week. We all kind of knew something was coming down the pike, but as predicted, Friday was indeed the day, and Adam Silver, mildly surprisingly, lowered the boom. I think we both agreed 16-20 was where we roughly thought Silver was going to land. He went probably to the max of what could be realistic in terms of the punishment for Ja Morant.
Yeah, and it's funny, Joe, because you say lowering the boom, I say lowering the boom, but nationally, I've been on probably, 20 radio shows doing all these interviews and whatnot, and everyone seems to kind of formulate it as 25 was less than they anticipated,
which is just fascinating to me.
It's fascinating to me too, because locally, as you said, we 15, 20 games hovered around that point, and it's largely because I don't know if they factored in what we did enough to us. I'll speak for myself, and then you can echo in. But for me, at least, I knew that the NBA was going to prioritize the fact that Ja Morant needs help. This wasn't all about just punishing him into being better. This was about setting up programs. As we saw, he'll have thresholds he has to meet, guidelines and things like that. That's no surprise to us. We've talked about that here over the past couple weeks. That was expected. The fact that the NBA was going to say, hey, he has to do this off of the court. Adam Silver is even hinted at the idea, basically saying this time, we know he did counseling and he went to Florida for, like a few days, but we want something a little bit longer, right? Something, I guess they would feel, if he has a more drawn out process or something similar to that, that's more likely to create change than saying, hey, here's a 50-game suspension. So I always thought that would be the case. And because I thought that would be the case, that's kind of why I hovered around that 15 to 20 game point. I'll get to that a little bit later. But basically with the CBA, as we've touched on, now he's projected to lose around $7.6 million, or as opposed to if he was going to be suspended 19 games, you're talking about $3.5 million. So it's a huge difference in just 6 games. And it's because of the way the CBA is outlined in terms of if you're suspended more than 20 games, there's a larger chunk of your salary that's being taken away as opposed to 19 games and under. So Ja got a significant penalty in our eyes. Seems like a lot of other people, nationally at least, wanted more for some reason. But I think it was fair. The NBA made their point with a 25-game suspension, almost 1/3 of the season. And then they also made the point by saying we want Ja Morant to improve as a person, as a human being. And they set out guidelines where we still don't know publicly what those are. But they did set those things out.
And we'll talk more about that later in the show, what those guidelines might be, a little more clarity on them might be nice. I think that another thing you're going to hear me say a couple of times on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
All right. So in this regard, I say that because the NBA has Ja Morant as one of its biggest superstars, right? Mm-hmm. Arguably their most famous young American-born player, right?
For sure.
Again, not LeBron James is obviously in a different realm. Steph Curry, obviously in a different realm.
This generation, yeah.
Right. This younger, who knows Devin Booker or Ja Morant? If you asked a kid in Maine, right? If you've heard either of those names, they've probably heard Ja, and they probably haven't heard Devin Booker if they aren't somebody that follows the NBA. Ja is closer to being a household name than Devin Booker. Not saying that Devin Booker isn't better than Ja. I think it's pretty obvious right now Devin Booker is. But I'm talking about fame. I'm talking about the size and scope of marketability. For whatever reason, it's Ja Morant. He has that it factor, right? The NBA suspending him for 50 games, more than half the season, it doesn't make a ton of sense when it comes to dollars and cents. You want to have this guy in a position to be able to return around Christmas time, right? You can't mark the Grizzlies in for a Christmas Day game every year. They just had their first one this past year. But again, Ja Morant returning a couple of weeks after his estimated return around the second week of December, it's Christmas, right? Like, I don't know that that's, again, the Grizzlies are not the Lakers, but I don't know that that's a massive coincidence, right? If that story, that arc, if it goes well, maybe there could be some hope that could be that launching point of that redemption story with Ja around Christmas time. And that might be overanalysis on my part, but I think beyond the schedule, it is you want to get this guy back on the court because he makes you money. He is an important piece of the NBA business. Doesn't mean that you can't afford to discipline him. Doesn't mean that he could get off easy. But to say that you're going to suspend one of your most marketable players for an entire year, it doesn't make dollars, so it doesn't make sense. That just was never going to be the case. And I think another reason that you and I and others locally weren't in that long-term suspension thought process, we actually cover the team and we actually read the reports about the team, or you, in your case, do your own reporting. The NBA has said numerous times that the incident with the Indiana Pacers, the incident with the 17-year-old at the time, that those weren't things that were being considered as part of these investigations, right? Like those were separate entities with their own separate investigations that the NBA had either concluded or were close to concluding at the time. Right. So this was about his social media use, his blatant disregard for safety, destructive reasoning or logic, to paraphrase the NBA's release or Adam Silver's quote. That's what it was about. And I think that this matches the punishment matches the crime in that way, given all that they had to consider with this being one of their most marketable young stars.
Yeah, people wanted to ask the question, would Adam Silver make an example out of Ja Morant? Adam Silver was very careful with the whole idea of making an example out of one player, because
that's not him. We've talked about that numerous times. Exactly. That's David Stern. That's not Adam Silver.
Yeah, and it's unfair to other players, as he said it. You make an example out of Ja Morant, now another player. Like that was never his intention. But he did set a precedent with this in terms of what Ja Morant. When you read what was said, I don't know what your overall takeaway was, Joe, but for me, it was, hey, Ja, this is strike two. Mm-hmm. That's how I read it. It was a lot of words, but in the simplest form, Ja, this is strike two. It was very long. It was lengthy. It was thorough outside of, a couple, things where they left a little bit, obscure, whatnot. But you can tell that the league wanted to make it clear we did a thorough investigation on this, and we are not pleased with what Ja Morant has done up to this point. I think it had to be thorough because, again, after that first meeting, they were so convinced that he's going to improve. And it wasn't even
Yeah.
just him. We've talked about Taylor Jenkins in exit interviews, Zach Kleiman, his teammates. Everyone's seen it. They felt it. I mean, people in the organization were telling me at one point, like, man, this might be one of the best things that's happened to him. Like, that's what people were saying. But you see, the way this plays out now, and, I think it's a good lesson learned. Ja Morant overall in totality, we're talking upwards of $50 million lost in the last 4 months. I mean, in potential earnings, not
sure.
But he could have had.
Assuming he would have made all NBA.
Assuming he
would have
made
all played those 8 games that he missed.
Mm-hmm. And if you take that money away, you're still talking upwards of more than $10 million simply due to fines, suspensions, and just self-inflicted wounds. So it's a tough position, but guess what? Ja Morant is 23 years old. He'll be 24 soon, but this is something that he can learn from. He should learn from. I think the NBA's punishment was very, very, thorough. The NBA's punishment was, as we saw the NBPA say it was excessive. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I will say it was thorough. It was, to me, when I saw it and read what was said, it was clear as to why they chose to do it.
And we will talk about the NBPA, and they're not very happy. But something that I learned on Friday after they announced that they weren't very happy was it's not the NBPA who files an appeal. It's Ja Morant himself.
Right.
So should Ja Morant appeal his 25-game suspension? Damichael and I have not talked about this yet, for the record. Text message before the show. We haven't talked about this, so I'm interested to get his take. I think I tweeted mine a little bit, so if you follow me on Twitter, you know mine, but I'm interested to hear what Damichael has to say here momentarily. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Ibotta. Ibotta does a wonderful job as you watch your closet grow after purchasing all of the latest trends. Maybe you want to watch your cash grow back with each purchase as well. That all comes down to Ibotta. You can earn cash back on every shopping trip. Ibotta gives you the cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods. You can link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop and get your cash back. It is that easy. You're going to earn cash back on hundreds of online brands as well, things like Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKED when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use the code LOCKED. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use the code LOCKED. Should Ja Morant's suspension be appealed by Ja Morant? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax, joined by my wonderful co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. It is NBA Draft Week. I promise we haven't forgotten that. Damichael will cover that these next couple of episodes. I'll be out of town. Damichael will be flying solo for a couple of shows, and I'm sure he's got all sorts of NBA draft goodies that he'll talk about with you on Tuesday and Wednesday's episodes. I'll be back with you for our official draft preview and a draft review to close out our week here on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we get into all the NBA stuff, we got to talk about the NBPA's response to Ja Morant's suspension. And I'm going to paraphrase here for the sake of time. They're not happy. They thought it was excessive. They thought it was not the right way to go. And they say that they are going to meet with Ja and discuss all possible options. As we mentioned earlier, one of those options is appealing the suspension. Ja Morant by himself, obviously he'd have the support of the NBPA and others, but he alone is the one who can go and make that appeal. It is not something that the union does for him. So, Damichael, I will give my take first, and then I'll let you kind of respond. I believe that he should just take it on the chin. Take the suspension, 25 games. You have people nationally that were calling for your head for the entire season. Not to say that was right, because it wasn't. But you were in a position where you can return around Christmas time, as we mentioned earlier. If you're Ja Morant, you are in a position where you are trying to win the PR battle. Because you've talked about in the past to Michael, he and his mom have discussed him wanting to be a billionaire by the age of 30, right? Mm-hmm. He is in a spot where he wants to get back on the good side of Nike, back on the good side of Powerade. All of these different brands that he is connected to, he wants to get back and stay in their good graces so that is where that money, that billionaire money, gets made. It's not through an NBA contract. It's through the things beyond it. So, again, as I mentioned earlier, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. If Ja Morant appeals, is it likely that the suspension gets reduced? I say yes. I think it is. I think you wind up around that 20 or so game mark that we originally talked about, finding that middle ground, because Adam Silver gets to look tough. I suspended him for 25. The NBPA stands up for one of their members. Everybody wins except for Ja Morant, because it's going to be Ja Morant who, rumors of saying it's a toy gun. Ja Morant saying one thing and then doing another. The time for that is past. It's a short-term loss in terms of the 7-point-some million that you mentioned earlier in the show. I think that it would be wise for Ja to just let this thing ride out and accept the 25-game suspension. What say you?
You got to appeal it.
Really?
I think you got to appeal this.
Wow. Okay.
You said why yourself, and I think we just can't overthink this. I think if he appeals it, there's a decent chance they'll win. The NBPA believes that they have, several examples of why this suspension is excessive. They'll go to a neutral arbiter, right? This is not a decision that will be made by Adam Silver,
Right,
and,
that's true.
The reset number, if the number is changed. And quite frankly, from an image perspective, no one will remember this. I don't think.
See, I think I disagree with you there. I disagree with you there.
No one's going to remember the fact that, Ja Morant. I mean, let's rewind. I don't think anybody remembers the fact from the Palace of Auburn here. Some people, the diehard basketball fans.
I didn't know Ron Artest was some major brand figure.
I mean, Jermaine O'Neal, Ron Artest, all those guys appealed, and Jermaine O'Neal won his appeal, but I don't remember it having any impact on his image, through the course of his career at that point. So I think, look, talking to brand experts and things like that, what I've been told is the best way to clean your image and kind of rehabilitate your image is what you do on the floor. In the case of Ja Morant, you need to get on the floor as much as possible. The difference in the Western Conference from a 25-game suspension to a 20-game suspension or 18-game suspension is substantial. The West is going to be really good. We're going to talk about one reason why the West is going to be really good later. But the West is going to be tough. And a lot of these teams are going to make a bunch of really good moves, including the Grizzlies. And with that being the case, I just feel like Ja needs to be on the floor as much as possible, because if you have him on the floor as much as possible, one, you strengthen his chances and the Grizzlies' chances of having a higher seed, better positioning in the playoffs. The best way to rehabilitate your image is simply to win. I think it's that simple. You want to get into the nuts and bolts. Who wouldn't want to appeal just for the opportunity to get more money? Like we just touched on the difference because of the CBA. I'll lay this out real quick. If your suspension is 19 games or lower, the NBA will subtract 1/145th of 1/145th% of your salary. If it's 20 games or more, you're talking about 1/110th percentage of your salary. So the difference is about 0.06 to 0.09% overall. But the difference from a 19-game suspension to a 20-game suspension, remember, we're talking about, now that he's suspended 25 games, him losing a little bit more than $300,000 per game. But the difference between 19 games and 20 games is over $1.5 million. So it would be a nice recoup if he were to bump this suspension down from 25 to say 18 games or whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, as a competitor, I'm not about to just take this on the chin. No, I want to get on the court with my guys.
No.
This is the window, right, Joe? We've said that. This is the window. I'm not about to try to waste this window and say, oh, guess what? I'm going to miss 25 games. And if we miss the playoffs by one game, well, I'm not about to be sitting up for the rest of my career thinking, what if I appealed that suspension and we got into playoffs and as a top 6 seed? And, appeal it. I want to exhaust the NBPA is going to go to bat for you. So you're not going to look. I don't think it's going to hurt his image that much from that perspective. The Players Association is going to go to bat for him. Joe, I think you got to appeal it.
Yeah, this is going to be the first time where we just kind of hard disagree. I think he just needs to. I had numerous people because I have family members, I have friends who know that I still cover the Grizzlies, do the podcast, all that sort of stuff, work at Bluff City Media. And they all messaged me and said that he got off easy. I think that obviously you have connections with, brands that I'll never have. So I'll defer to you on that. Just talking to people that are common, casual sports fans. Right. I think if he appeals it maybe not as bad as getting in trouble the second time overall. But I think he made the statement that he needs to change and do all these things. And now he's fighting it again. Now he's fighting against it. He thinks he doesn't deserve it. I think he's going to get a lot of negative PR, and you have to decide if it's worth it. Like I personally do not think it's worth it. I think he would just be better off saying I was wrong. I did it for the second time in a 90-day span. I just need to go away from basketball and not fight this. And I do need time away. I agree. I think that if he puts up a fight against it to the casual fan, all the reasons you just outlined make sense. But again, if he's talking about trying to be a billionaire, he needs to win back the casual fan. There are a lot of people that don't like him very much right now. They don't. They think he is spoiled, or they think that he's entitled. They think he's trying to convey a way of life that he's not connected to in any way, shape, or form. And obviously, it's not impacting the limited shoe releases that are happening and those sorts of things. You've covered that a good bit. But the key word there is limited, right? That's one of the parts that you cover. Like, it's not as expansive. If this didn't happen, the Ja one would be all over the place. It would be in every store in the country. It would like that. I think that there's an old line from the Kenny Rogers song, The Gambler, right? Yep. You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. This to me is a time where you fold them and you just say, I'm out. I'm going to see you in the middle of December. I think that we have something to talk about. We can revisit this. We're running a little long here. But I think that there's a really good conversation to be had here. So I kind of like that we don't agree. We'll come back to this maybe later this week here on Locked On Grizzlies. But that's again, Damichael makes fair points. I'm not disagreeing with that. But again, $3 million is essentially the difference. That's chump change compared to what he says he wants to be. And just in my experience talking to people, I think that he's got a little more heat on the national scale than maybe he should even. Like, I'm not even necessarily saying they're right, but I think it's there and it's real. We'll talk about how the Western Conference has shifted once again, getting back to the basketball floor here next on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is still going strong, even with the NBA season over. Remember, with Prize Picks, you are going against the projections available. It's not you against other people. You can do this with all sorts of sports, right? The WNBA, Major League Baseball, PGA golf, all sorts of different activities that are still going on as we speak. So plenty to do over at Prize Picks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It is that easy with safe and fast withdrawals, and they are currently operational in over 30 states as well as in Canada. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. We're talking Bradley Beal to the Phoenix Suns next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. We're finishing up this Monday episode of the show. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax, joined by the incomparable Damichael Cole, the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at DamichaelC. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at Joe Mullinax. Between Bluff City Media, where I work, and the Commercial Appeal, where Damichael works, all sorts of great content. And, of course, Locked On Grizzlies will be with you every day this week. Damichael flying solo the next couple of episodes. But after that, I'll be back as well, talking NBA draft and all those fun things. We'll leave the Ja Morant stuff behind for now, because again, like I said earlier in the show, I thought we had a pretty good conversation there, and I think we need to expand upon it. But I do want to cover the Bradley Beal to Phoenix trade that has been agreed to, right? It hasn't been fully processed yet because they're trying to find other places for Chris Paul. Maybe by the time you're watching this or listening to this, it has been processed. But that's where we stand as Damichael and I chat, getting ready for Monday's show here. How does this impact the Grizzlies? It's hard to say, right? Because when you look at Phoenix now, they essentially are – there's 5 dudes that they have under contract, right, which is so funny. Memphis has 14 guys under contract, and Phoenix has 5. DeAndre Ayton, Cam Payne, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker. Those are the 5. So who the hell knows what the Phoenix Suns are going to look like, right? We know – I mean, DeAndre Ayton might be traded to try to get a couple of role players. I do think the NBA has learned a lesson in no trade clauses because it was one of the most, Chris Paul, I think it was Landry Shamet, and a couple of second rounders or something like that was essentially the haul for Bradley Beal. But that's the best Washington could do because they had to pick a team that Brad was willing to go to. I think Phoenix just got a heck of a lot harder to defend when your third best scorer is Bradley Beal. I've never seen that before. That's pretty darn good. But at the same time, what that depth looks like, Phoenix is definitely going all in. They're already over the salary cap just with those 5 salaries on their roster. So they're definitely going to pay the luxury tax. It's so interesting to see that compared to the 14 guys on the Grizzlies roster. We just talked about the Ja Morant suspension. Does the fact that Phoenix took another step toward contention, because I don't think they're the favorite in the Western Conference. I don't know how you can see what Denver just did, acknowledging that all of their core, except for Bruce Brown, who's not really a member of their core, is back. I think Denver's the favorite, but they take another step toward, being a top 2 or 3 team in the Western Conference for sure, just in terms of sheer talent, especially offensively. Does this do anything for Memphis? I'm of the opinion that it doesn't. The Grizzlies were going to do what they were going to do anyway. And, the fact that the the Suns just went all in, double down, I'm not sure that moves the needle for what the Grizzlies were thinking of doing anyway.
Me, when it comes to these type of conversations, I always say this because it's more, when we talk about the NBA, it's more about the game than the names. And how that works for the Grizzlies, I'll always go to bat for them from this perspective. Their starting lineup, the structure of it is almost perfectly set. And it could be pretty close to perfect depending on what they get at small forward. Remember what I've said in the past. They have players pretty much at each starting spot that is very elite at something. Steven Adams, no matter who the Suns put at center, that player probably won't be a better rebounder than Steven Adams. No matter who the Suns put at point guard, that player probably won't be a better point guard than Ja Morant. No matter who the Suns put at shooting guard, that probably won't be a better percentage-wise shooter than Desmond Bane.
Sure.
So no matter who the Suns put at center or power forward, he probably won't be a better rim protector than Jaren Jackson Jr. So the point is, no matter who the Grizzlies get, they're not going to be better scorers than Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal.
That's a great point.
It's you can go both ways with this. So here's my thing, though, just to get back to the original question. I think it doesn't really move the needle in terms of what the Grizzlies need to do, because at the end of the day, the cliche thing works for me here. You focus on yourself, and everything else is going to fall in place. The Grizzlies just need to get a good small forward, a really good small forward, and they'll be able to say, look, we got an all-star point guard, we got an all-star power forward, we pretty much got an all-star shooting guard. Like every team would want Desmond Bane, pretty much. You got Steven Adams. I mean, if the Suns were to trade a guy like DeAndre Ayton, I mean, they would love to have a Steven Adams. That's not something that, the Grizzlies would probably consider. But just saying, that is a player that I'm sure they would love to have that'll fit, what they got going over there. So basically, the Grizzlies have the pieces. So do the Nuggets. And we'll see. The Lakers are another team that does not have a lot of roster spots right now. They have a lot of open roster spots, so we'll see what happens there. And then with the Suns thing, I've been hearing a lot of conversations about, this team isn't this or this team is this. I've seen some people say, yeah, just wrap it up. Suns got it. And I've seen some people say, it doesn't really move me. Like everything ranging in between. And it's because the Suns don't have guys on the roster right now. Like this is a complete disrespect, Joe, to like the 5th through the 15th mans of an NBA roster. Like people are completely whether they think the Suns are going to be good or whether they think the Suns are going to be bad. You're completely ruling out the fact that adding a Jay Crowder, Joe's not going to like that, but adding a Jay Crowder to that lineup would move me a little bit. Or, the small pieces like that. So I want to see how that roster feels out. But overall, does it change? Does it matter in Memphis? No. What matters in Memphis is going out and getting that starting small forward. When you get that player and you have everything else in place and addressing the point guard spot, because we'll talk more about that over the course of the future here, as well as Tyus Jones, Ja Morant suspension, all that stuff. That's what matters to me the most in Memphis. The Bradley Beal thing is cute, but at the end of the day, the Grizzlies have in place what works for them. I will say this, I will add this one point though. Mm-hmm. If it does matter to the Grizzlies, it pretty much emphasizes what me and you've already talked about, and that's the need for an elite wing defender. Because right now, you don't have one guy that you'd probably be willing to put on Kevin Durant or Devin Booker, and now you don't have one you probably want to put on Bradley Beal for a prolonged period of time. I like Desmond Bane's potential there, but for a long period of time, you don't want Desmond Bane guard.
And Bane is so important to your offense
because he's important. Exactly. That's why I said for a long period of time, he's gonna get tired. So that's where I am on it. I think if anything, it increases the need for that wing defender, but knock out two birds with one stone. Get that guy with your small forward spot.
I would agree, and it's good to be back to agreement. I think
we do that a lot.
We do that a lot. Yeah. It just makes me, I just get nervous because I don't want you to think less of me because I just care. I think so much of you. I do agree. And I'll let you kind of have the last word on that. I think that that's the priority, even if it means moving on from Tyus Jones. And maybe that's something that we can talk more about later on in the week when I come back. Does the Ja Morant suspension change your mind on that? That'll be an interesting topic that, again, you'll be flying solo for a couple of days. So if you feel the need to touch on it, I can catch up when I return. But I think you make some fair points there to Michael. Memphis has to worry about themselves, right? Maybe Phoenix is now viewed as the second or third best team in the West, and the Grizzlies tick down a little bit. After the Morant suspension, there's going to be people that come out and say the Grizzlies are going to miss the playoffs, which is going to be hilarious. I'll gladly take that bet. But I do believe that Memphis will be okay as long as they prioritize getting that elite wing defender. And that matters more than another good scorer on the perimeter. They need somebody that can defend and lighten that burden from a Desmond Bane, who is a better defender now than he was 2 years ago. Sure. But that's still not why he might get a max contract here in the next few weeks. He's going to get that because he's one of the most efficient offensive players in the National Basketball Association. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube as well. Make sure that you're subscribing, rating, reviewing, liking, commenting, being an everydayer as we continue to grind forth through this offseason. As I mentioned a moment ago, Damichael will be flying solo for our Tuesday and Wednesday editions of the show. I'll be out of town. Damichael takes good care of you. I listen when he flies solo. He does a great job, of course, because he's Damichael. I mean, look at him. Look at that guy. He's fantastic. So you're going to be just fine in my absence. And like I said, I'll be back for our draft preview episode on Thursday. Damichael, I'm sure you'll have lots of fun stuff cooked up for our wonderful listeners and viewers.
Man, it's going to be fun. I'm going to try to maybe for at least one of those. I'll say, look, you're going to see me, but you might see someone else who's not Joe. We'll see. Stay tuned for that.
An additional guest. I like that. Just don't fire me while I'm gone. Like if I try to show up on Thursday,
it'll be whoever comes on. It'll be a clause. They'll know that you're just here for a day.
Just here for a day. It's a guest host. We're not testing out my spot.
We're not testing anything out. We got a nice thing working here.
Yeah, I would agree. Thank you, Damichael. Whew, I feel a lot better now. Well, obviously, you guys are going to have a great time with Damichael and a secret guest host in the next couple of days. I look forward to being back with you here later in the week. Damichael's going to do just fine in my absence. Make sure you're staying with us each and every day here on Locked On Grizzlies, your number one destination each and every chance you get for Memphis Grizzlies content. Until next time, stay locked in. This is Locked On Grizzlies.